The rest of the day when we returned was of little note with but one exception, or perhaps it is more accurate to say that everything but that exception was a blur. I was still abuzz in my head over the unexpected level of fun and Fauve's engaging interest in my home. Human curiosity is something else. It takes getting used to. Charming most of the time, once you are used to it, but it can be vexing since the boundaries of what is acceptable to ask are not always immediately clear. It was pleasant, though, to have her show such interest in me, in where I'm from and how I lived. I was settled in my room and making the notes that would become this narrative when I heard Fauve calling for me. "Bailey, dinner. Are you hungry? You want something to eat?" Fauve's voice was drawn out. It's a strange thing that humans do. Their shouts are always longer than words spoken at a normal pace, and none that I spoke with ever really knew why they did it. They just did. My personal suspicion was that it was a kind of echolocation, wherein the continued noise made it easier to find the source, but the humans themselves never seemed to give it a second thought. Even when drawing out their words was utterly unnecessary. Unlike most predatory species, they tended to be a noisy lot, a reflection of their social nature and perhaps a reflection of how high they were in the food chain. They didn't worry about attracting attention since there was nothing they could not kill. Before I detail the dinner, I want to relay something I heard once, which explains just how little humans have to worry about and why they can make as much noise as they please. I did confirm that the story was in fact true, having heard it directly from my professor, who was traveling with the humans at the time on his way home. It seems that a human cargo ship carrying a handful of colonists was forced to lay over on the planet Maxic 9, a planet where the only intelligent species evolved from a socialized prey animal, and which was still prey to the wild Gaxa, a vicious, slithering creature that, while not intelligent, was capable of burrowing through almost anything if given enough time. The Maxiki are a timid, fearful species, and having learned that a group of apex predators were laying over on their station, were more than a little nervous, and my professor sought to alleviate their fears with a demonstration. He invited a handful of women with childcare experience to join him on the planet's surface, and took them to an area where large numbers of Gaxa attacks took place. Many Maxiki infants were taken and devoured. I will relay the rest in his words insomuch as possible. "You want your children to be safe, don't you?" Professor Schlith asked, while looking down at the little blue four-armed Maxiki. The nursery watcher looked up at the group of towering two-armed apex predators, thickly muscled as most pioneer types were said to be. It was only their seeming lack of obvious hunger and the presence of sexlith that kept the Maxiki calm. "Yes, but is this wise?" the watcher asked. "They won't eat our young themselves?" Schleith's tongue teased at his own eyeballs a few times, and he turned to the handful of human women. "Keep an eye on these children for a short time, will you? Just be careful of predators that may get into the walls. Gaxa serpents will horribly mutilate a Maxiki infant. The little things are so helpless with no one to care for them. They'll die horrible, horrible deaths with nobody between them and danger. Their parents can't be here, so you are all they'll have between them and being dissolved alive." He then picked up a nearby infant and held it out to the nearest human woman. Maxiki infants are roughly the size of a human baby. They are soft, fleshy, their heads a little large, and their eyes are all the size as those of a human infant's. The women who followed Schlith nodded their heads, and after being given a short care routine, the Schlith led the Maxiki watchmen away. They returned 4 hours later to the smell of blood thick in the air. The Maxiki watcher rushed to the door, threw it open, and found one of the human women standing there covered in blue blood and holding a very large knife. "Oh no," Maxiki whispered, ready to let out the keening wail of his kind when their children were slaughtered by deadly monstrous creatures, only for the chirp of a Maxiki infant to draw his attention past her. "Hi there," the human woman said without noticing the Maxiki distress. She stepped aside and revealed the other pioneer humans, similarly coated with bloody viscera, but the infants were all fine. "Sorry we didn't get a chance to clean up yet. There was a little incident with those snaky things. You were right. They went right for the little ones. That certainly couldn't be allowed. So me and the girls, we sliced them up real good. Moxie went chasing after one that got away. She just radioed in saying she cleared out the whole nest of those filthy things, and she'll be back shortly." She wasn't lying. A half a dozen Gaxa serpents with deep cuts and gouges ripped into their heads lay piled in one corner. One of the pioneer humans was holding up a Gaxa corpse and skinning it on a table. "The meat seems edible, so we were just going to harvest it. Waste not, want not, you know? See, I told you. Slith said, if they feel a maternal or paternal call to something, predators can make the finest caregivers. And as my professor relayed the story to me, that is how Maxiki ended up hiring a group of human colonists to stay long-term. And that is why it doesn't matter how loud a human yells or how much noise they make as a group. It doesn't give them away, it warns away their other living things that danger is near and to avoid them, or they may add to their meal-extensive diet, which so far seems to include anything they want. Trying to adapt to their way of doing things, I opened the door and called out, "Yes, I'll be right there." I want to add here that parents will frequently give their children the task of rousting and gathering the rest of the household for meals, and children rarely refuse such chores, but they also do not do them as intended. I'm very sure that William asked Fauve to see if I wanted dinner, but that he intended for her to come all the way down the stairs and ask me. Instead, however, she stood at the stairs and shouted the question. Human children are as loud as they are charming in some of their actions. I put away my datapad and ascended the stairs for my first evening meal with my host family. I won't say I wasn't nervous. I'd seen enough deaths at dinner tables in human entertainment media, but even knowing those were mere dramas, fictions and the like, I was anxious about doing something wrong and making a bad impression. What if there was some hidden taboo that would get me kicked out of the house if I broke it? And the truth is, such a taboo does exist. Never discuss religion or politics at the dinner table. The reason being that both of those are divisive topics, and meals are meant to build bonds of affection, to unite and tie a group together, and those topics serve only to tear people apart. I sat down at the table just as Rebecca was placing down plates. Michael sat in a specially built chair of unusual size that made him sit at equal height to an adult, while William tore up small bits of infant-sized cheese slices and held up bits of soft vegetables that the tiny human ingested. Fauve was at the refrigerator and drew out a pitcher of dark cold liquid that I learned was called tea and set it at the center of the table before returning for more cups. I felt a little uncomfortable being the only one doing nothing, but they were done before I could offer to help. The division of labor in this particular human household was not universal to the species, I have to add. While children helping is fairly normal, the tasks performed by caregivers or parents has no single standard. If one partner works for pay and the other does not, the one who does not is considered responsible for the administration of the household, typically paying the bills, cleaning, cooking, ordering chores. Though the other laboring partner may contribute to some degree within the house to allow the homeworker to take a break as well. If both work on paid labor jobs, then it is common to divide the household duties, and in this way they each ensure that the other is given a fair amount of time to relax relative to the other. Some of these chores, even tedious ones, may be bonding activities of their own. William, thus I would later learn, was not an excellent cook, but he would often assist the far more talented Rebecca or perform companion tasks such as running to the store to pick up a forgotten ingredient needed for preparing a meal. It may appear to you that their affection is bound up in just doing things for each other, but I must caution you to note that this is quite the opposite. The human species does not love others because they do things for them. They do things for one another because they love. Dinner consisted of a strange amount of humor. Chiefly from William, it seems that there is a particular form of humor called dad jokes. These are a kind of humor that is apparently only allowed to the elder men of a family. The privilege of the patriarch, it seems. Such humor consists largely of puns, and often these jokes are repeated. When Fauve said, "I'm hungry," William replied, "Hi, hungry. I'm Dad. Are you a guest of my daughter, Fauve? Is she joining us for dinner? You do look very much like her." There was a collective rolling of the eyes, a gesture of exasperation by both his wife and daughter, followed by Fauve exclaiming simply, "Dad do," as if his title alone were a remonstration. In my study of human humor, I found considerable divergence in application. The leading theory among humans, that humor evolved as a release of tension after a misperception of danger, explained its structure, but it did not explain its social application. William's use of dad jokes to tease his family could not represent danger or risk. However, while I watched them talk, and watched the way Michael laughed when they laughed, I realized something. Humans use humor in wildly varying ways compared to other species who have some form of outlet for relief from misperceptions. Some humans use humor as a kind of mask, not in the literal sense but in the figurative. Recall what I said about human dishonesty. They use lies as social lubricant. Humor, it seems, is another of the same. A human in pain will use laughter to detract from that pain, either physical or mental. And when I say mental pain, if there is a species more prone to its own self-torment than Homo sapiens, I have yet to encounter it. Not by intent, usually, but rather they suffer from such a myriad of maladies unheard of in the galaxy that it would take an eternity to track them all, or so it seemed. Humor is often used to hide these maladies. A depressed human whose brain is failing to provide chemical releases required for happiness, or whose brain is actively making them depressed, requires care. Care in the minds of some humans equals weakness, and to avoid appearing weak, they will pretend to be happy, lying to themselves and the whole world, suffering in silence rather than admit what is sometimes perceived as a flaw of character. Human pride, it drives them to the stars, but it can be as delicate as cracked glass too. Their propensity to use humor to mask this internal sadness rather than seek viable treatment is such that it is only in the last century or two, after a handful of prominent human warriors and comedians came forth to talk openly about their struggles, that it is becoming more acceptable to not play with a mask of happiness. It made me watch my host family far more closely when I learned of these things later. Other masks of humor include disguising lust. The human propensity to procreate is such that almost anything but fedoras and bearded necks are used, or at least are used with some success in finding mates. Humor's lubricating utility was such that it created relaxation in those who it was used successfully on, and thus it made the potential mate more comfortable and desire more time with the source of laughter. I'd seen humor used by characters in fictions for everything from health betterment to smoothing over anger, and yet in seeing the patriarch of the household use his dad jokes on his family matriarch and daughter, none of those other uses applied, which left one clear reason: affection. Laughter in humans releases feel-good chemicals in their brains, and William clearly held a considerable amount of affection for his household. And his dad jokes humor was one of the ways he socialized within his family unit. Strangely, his mate was similarly affectionate. Her physical touch to his hand or shoulder, and the little considerations, such as preparing evening coffee and fetching dessert for the table, were strong evidence of mutuality and bonding. I say strangely, because pair bonding species, particularly social ones, are relatively rare. When a creature is social, they are usually sexually so, with frequent matings in what humans would call orgies, and no singular tie to offspring, which are instead typically raised either by the mother alone or by the whole community. In one species in Sector C-137, beings bond serially, mating for weeks until conception and then parting again. Humans, however, other than a profession referred to as porn stars, are not socially sexual, but rather bond as pairs, or at most, with a small group with one singular reproducing male with a small band of females, the latter of which comprised a considerable amount of fictional media's attention and was highly idealized and almost always comedic. But in the pair-bonded household of the Walkers, familial ties of affection are not only expected to endure for life, but they are mutually reciprocated, and in all the course of that meal, none of them brought up my shameful flight from the water park. They went so far out of their way to avoid the subject that Rebecca didn't mention what she did with Michael while there. I, however, felt my confidence growing while I looked down at the peach cobbler on my plate. It was the only peach one. The others were thick slices of chocolate with a fluffy white cream on top. Sensing my curiosity, Fauve spoke up. Brushing back her long, braided hair, she said, "You can't eat chocolate, so you get this one." "What, you thought you'd just sit there while we ate pie?" She stabbed her fork into the chocolate pie slice, and the metal clinked against the glass plate beneath the treat. "No way! That'd be a dick move." Fauve was a fairly direct girl, a trait I appreciated, and didn't mince words. Her father was quick to agree. That would not be... I saw that broad grin on his face that preceded every joke and braced myself. Peachy. Even across the divide of life and species, I groaned at that pun along with the others. "So, are we going to go to the water park again tomorrow?" I asked. To be honest, I knew the answer. I just thought it would head off any more puns. "What are you talking about? Of course we are, assuming you want to. I would never choose to be a wet blanket," William answered, and it was only the roll of both Fauve's and Rebecca's eyes that let me catch that he had slipped in another pair of puns. I had been defeated. "I'll pass. That ticket taker, the one in the wolf shirt, kept hovering around between the kid zone and the women's changing area. He made me uncomfortable. I'm water parked out. I'll stay here with Michael. He got a little red anyway," Rebecca said matter-of-factly. William shrugged. "Ew. Yeah, I don't blame you. Maybe wait to go back until they fire that guy. I'll put in a complaint for you when I get there. The turnover there has been high for years. He won't last." He reassured his wife and patted the back of her hand with the palm of his own in an absent-minded gesture of reassurance. Fauve chimed in a moment later. "I'd like to go. I might have to work for a few hours in the morning, if my lazy coworker doesn't show up again." She groused a little at that. A slightly sour look came over her face, and she puckered up her lips as if a lemon had been suddenly forced into her mouth. Then added, "But I can take a lift from the mall to the water park and meet you later, in the worst-case scenario at least." "Great," William remarked and said directly to me. "Sundays are the quietest days there, so we might even get to do everything we missed yesterday. Sorry to pull you out like that, Bailey." "It's okay. It's, fine, just fine," I answered, kind of stammered a little. My ears flicked and my tail didn't know whether to tuck itself or wag like it had been electrocuted. William was protecting my reputation with his daughter, who didn't know about how I'd had to basically run from what to them was just a good time. Nobody had ever done anything like that for me, not ever in my whole life. And yet it had been done several times for me today alone. The reason for Professor Sixlith's affection for his humans was making a whole lot of sense to me now.